Heyo, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley. I'm a stay-at-home wife and mom, and today I'm going to be sharing what we ate this week. Unfortunately, we did have a shower leaking plumbing issue, so we did have a wrench thrown into the plans for dinner one day, but that's okay. That's how life goes. The dinners I was able to make this week were super delicious, and considering that one day was weird, I included a bonus muffin recipe. Let's get started. First up this week, I made us some stovetop meatloaf. I found this recipe on Pinterest because I am still hunting for a meatloaf recipe that is worthy of my handwritten recipe book. So to get started, I am going to go ahead and chop up the onion that I need for this recipe, and I'm also going to just chop up the entire bag of onions that I have here so that I can then put them into a large Ziploc freezer bag, freeze them, and just grab what I need through the week as I need it, so that I don't have to keep doing this all week because I really hate chopping onions, so I'd rather just get it all done at one time. Of onions once I was done chopping all 5 or 6, I believe, and man, that bag of onions is awesome to have in your freezer just ready to go. So next I'm just going to go ahead and start prepping some potatoes as well. I conveniently needed mashed potatoes for 2 recipes this week, so I decided to go ahead and once again just prep everything today so that I could have that step done for later. I actually do not wash my potatoes before I peel them if I am going to be peeling them, because I find it much harder to hold on to them and actually get the skin off. So I will go ahead and wash them after I peel them. I have never tried making mashed potatoes in the Instant Pot before, so I thought I would go ahead and try that today. I will have the recipe that I used linked down below in the description box. Here I'm just dicing the potatoes really roughly to just help them fit a little bit better into the Instant Pot, and I'm also going to give them a quick rinse before I put them in as well. So you just add your potatoes into your Instant Pot, and you're going to want to add about 5 to 6 cups of water. I believe the important part is that you just want the water over or just about over all of the potatoes. Then I'm going to go ahead and add a very generous portion of salt because they are potatoes and they need it. For the meatloaf itself, I added 1 pound of ground beef to a large bowl, along with some salt, pepper, and Italian seasoning. Once again, I'm sorry guys, I totally measure with my heart and my eyes, so I don't have exact measurements of what I used, but once again, the recipe will be linked down below in the description box, so if you prefer to use tablespoons and teaspoons, that's definitely there for you. Next, I'm just going ahead and cracking in an egg and adding in a gigantic portion of garlic. Now this is one ingredient that I do try to pay attention to. I added about 1 teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce, and Worcestershire can be fairly potent, so I do try to generally be around the same ballpark as the recipe. Next, I added about a quarter cup of ketchup, and the part that makes this really interesting, finally, the stovetop stuffing mix. I used the savory herb variety. Then I added about a quarter cup of whole milk to the mixture, but I ended up having to add about another quarter cup a little later in the process because it was just a little bit too dry. Here you are going to watch me struggle to try to gracefully mix together the meatloaf with a spoon, and that just absolutely does not work. So I go ahead and get a glove and start mixing it together by hand. I actually recently learned something about meatloaf. I'm sure if you cook, you've heard to not overwork things or to overmix things because it makes it like an undesirable consistency. Well, meatloaf is actually the opposite, and you would want to overwork it so that it helps bind everything together and keep it really compact. I'm just going to go ahead and get my baking dish ready and press my meat mixture down into the pan and try to get it as kind of smushed and even as you possibly can. I actually forgot to do this step earlier because it's not included in the recipe, but is something that I kind of like to universally do for meatloaves. I like to add any onion that is called for in the meatloaf. I like to saute it first, so I forgot to do that. This was supposed to be mixed in with the meat mixture items, but instead, because I forgot about it, we're going to watch me try to awkwardly stir this into the meatloaf that is already in the pan because I am immensely lazy and I did not want to dirty another bowl. Thankfully, everything ended up working out just fine. Next, I'm just making a quick topping sauce for the meatloaf. I have about 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, a quarter cup to a half a cup of ketchup, and about 1 teaspoon of red wine vinegar. I'm just going to go ahead and mix that together and then spoon that over top of the meatloaf. And really, you can put as much or as little as you would like. It's really just up to your preferences. I went ahead and put the meatloaf in the oven at 350 degrees for 1 hour, and really the cooking time doesn't matter too much. The important part is that the internal temp on the meatloaf is 160 degrees. And for me, 1 hour did that almost perfectly. When the 8 minutes is done on the Instant Pot, you're going to go ahead and do a quick release. You're not going to let it do any natural release. And I go ahead and add a whole stick of butter, salt, pepper, garlic powder, grated Parmesan cheese, parsley, sour cream, and a little bit of heavy whipping cream to my mashed potatoes. I don't really know why I decided to try to mash the potatoes with a wooden spoon, but I did, so enjoy. I quickly abandoned that and go ahead and pick up my hand mixer, which gets the job done way easier and much better. I actually really enjoyed making mashed potatoes in the Instant Pot, and I think that's going to be my go-to way from now on because you could leave the Instant Pot on warm afterwards, and I was able to keep these like the perfect temperature for several hours. For our vegetable side, I just boiled some carrots until they were fork tender, then added a little bit of butter and brown sugar to them and kind of let that simmer and reduce down for another 10 to 15 minutes. They were supposed to kind of be like a copycat Cracker Barrel carrot, and they were pretty good, but definitely not Cracker Barrel carrots. This is the meatloaf right out of the oven. It looks absolutely delicious, kind of crispy and bubbling around the edges. And I'm going to go ahead and take my meat thermometer and check the temperature, and you can see that it's over 160, so we're good to go. Here are the final plates. This is my plate and Noah's plate. We ate a little early, like somewhere between lunch and dinner, so the kids weren't quite hungry yet. And I absolutely loved this meatloaf. I thought it was the best one I've ever made. Noah preferred the more original style meatloaf, but he still thought this one was really good. So this meatloaf does have a really forward stuffing flavor because there's a whole box of stuffing in it. So just keep that in mind. This is for sure worth trying. Next, I'm going to share my recipe for my baked ziti. Even though these are bow tie noodles, I would highly recommend that you use a noodle like ziti or rigatoni or cavatappi, something with a hollow center so that the sauce can really cling to it. If you've ever had Olive Garden's 5-cheese ziti, this recipe tastes really similar. Over a medium-high heat, I'm melting 2 tablespoons of butter, and I'm going to add the equivalent of about a medium diced onion from my frozen onions bag, and then I'm just going to season that with salt, pepper, and Italian seasoning. Just let these cook down and get soft, and then I added a heaping tablespoon or 2 of minced garlic. Then I added 1 pound of ground sausage, and I also seasoned that with salt, pepper, and Italian seasonings, and took my meat masher, mashed that up fairly fine because that's just how I like it. Typically with this recipe, we enjoy having it with homemade meatballs, and I will definitely in the future include those in some recipe. But if you were here last week, you saw me make some stuffed shells, which were super delicious, and I just browned some sausage, onions, and garlic for that, and we all really enjoyed it, so we kind of just wanted to have it again in a different way. I'm going to go ahead and drain the grease off of the sausage, and an easy way that I've discovered to do this is to just take your large casserole dish that you will already be using in this recipe and line the bottom with a couple layers of paper towels. The water is boiling good enough for me, and I also did underboil these noodles by about 1 minute since they will continue cooking in the oven. Now we're going to get started on my favorite part of this recipe, a homemade Alfredo or white sauce, and it's actually really easy to do this at home instead of buying a jarred sauce, and absolutely no shade if a jarred sauce is what you prefer to eat. Once again, your food is your food. I just didn't realize how easy an Alfredo or white sauce was to make the first time I made it, so it really kind of changed the game for me as far as flavor goes. So to the pot, I just added about a half a stick of butter, a large portion of garlic once again, some pepper, Italian seasoning, crushed red pepper flake, and some lemon pepper seasoning. I like to let all of the herbs and seasonings kind of saute with the garlic and the butter. I find that it really brings out their flavor. Then I'm going to add about 2 tablespoons of cream cheese and let that soften a little bit. Next, I'm going to add some heavy whipping cream, and really the amount that you add here is just going to depend on how much sauce you want to make. So I believe I added around a cup of the heavy whipping cream, maybe went in for a splash more. And like I said, this is really just going to depend on how much sauce you want, which is going to depend on how pink you want your sauce. So if you want your sauce more pink, make more Alfredo sauce. If you want your sauce more red, make less Alfredo sauce. I've also seen quite a few homemade white sauce recipes that encourage you to make a roux in the first step. Personally, I don't really like that. I feel like it thickens the sauce up a little too much for what I want in a pasta. So the sauce is going to look really thin and a little runny at this stage. Once again, trust the process. It will thicken up whenever we place the whole baking dish into the oven eventually. I also just added a little additional pepper to the sauce mixture, and I'm going to go ahead and let that simmer for a little bit. Naturally, the sauce is going to start thickening up just because it's a cream sauce, but whenever you add this shaky cheese into the mixture, that's when it's really going to start thickening up, and you'll see that as I'm testing it by scraping the sauce away from the bottom of the pot to see if it's getting close to the consistency that we prefer. Then I'm just going to go ahead and dump in a jar of marinara sauce that I had in my pantry. Put some water in the jar, shake up, get the last little bits out, and I actually really like this marinara sauce. I think it's about $1.50 at Walmart, and it's pretty good. Stir, stir, stir. Your beautiful pink sauce has come together, and trust me, this sauce is literally liquid gold. It is so tasty. I like to add my slightly undercooked pasta right into the sauce pot so that I can thoroughly stir and combine everything before I transfer it to the baking dish. Now bear with me here because I know that this is looking a little soupy and a little thin, but trust me, whenever we put it into the oven, it's going to firm up and it's going to kind of absorb some of this excess liquid since we undercooked our pasta, and it's going to have so much flavor. Next, we're going to go ahead and add our crumbled sausage topping, and my kids actually do not like eating meat with other things if they'll actually eat meat, so that's the little dish in the back. I reserved some of the sausage for them, and then they're going to just have the pasta on the side. I don't mind making simple accommodations to the food like this for them because we're all people and we all have our preferences, our likes and our dislikes, so I definitely try to help them out on that front. Here I'm just grating up about half a block of cheese. This is the part where you can grate up as much as you want to put on top. I felt like since the sauce was already pretty rich and indulgent, I didn't need a whole block of cheese, and I thought the half block would do just fine. You just pop this in the oven uncovered at about 400 for 20 to 30 minutes. Here we are right out of the oven. You can see that everything is still bubbling and delicious. And to say that this is one of my favorite meals is really an understatement. It really has so many yummy flavors wrapped up into one dish. Here's some quick proof that the soupiness does indeed go away. And I just served this up with a simple side salad, and we ate on this dish for a few days. Okay, here we go. So this was the curveball night. When we woke up in the morning after Noah took a shower, we went downstairs and we saw a little puddle of water, and it turned out that we had a plumbing issue with our shower drain, and we ended up having to call a plumber and getting some piping replaced. So, you know, it was a full day. And I planned to make the shepherd's pie on this night, but it just didn't work out. That's real life though. I know we've all been in a situation like this where we just don't have time to do what we had planned for dinner. So here we go. This was definitely the kids' favorite dinner of the week, pizza. And Noah and I just had some leftover pasta. And that is our newly acquired ceiling hole that we have from the repair. Our final meal of the week is going to be one of Noah's favorites, and that is shepherd's pie. Now, don't come at me. I know that technically shepherd's pie is made with lamb, I believe, and I'm only going to be using ground beef, but hey, that's just what we call it, so everything will be just fine. I'm going to go ahead and start this recipe like I start 90% of all of my other savory recipes by melting about 2 tablespoons of butter into my skillet and adding some of the frozen onions. Then I'm going to go ahead and season these with salt and pepper. I just let these onions soften and cook down for a little bit, and after a few minutes I went ahead and added a very large heaping tablespoon of minced garlic. I'm also adding 1 pound of ground beef, and to the ground beef I'm going to go ahead and season that with salt, pepper, a little bit additional garlic powder just because we really like garlic, and some crushed rosemary. I don't put too much crushed rosemary in this because it is a fairly potent herb, so I would use that sparingly. I'm going to go ahead and mash this down, let it cook down, and also add maybe a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. And I think this adds a really nice umami flavor. I see a lot of people add mushrooms to their shepherd's or cottage pies, and unfortunately I dislike mushrooms, so this is a pretty good substitute for me. Now, I cannot figure out why this ground beef was so fatty and greasy this time. I use this ground beef all the time. It's my only type of ground beef I use, and I almost never have this issue. So what I did was I just took a clean paper towel and soaked up all of that excess grease and fat, and just continued to let the ground beef kind of crisp up in the pan for a little bit. Then I go ahead and start adding my vegetables. So I just went ahead and used up some carrots that I had left over in the freezer, some sweet peas, and also about half of a can of corn. To my pan, I'm going to go ahead and re-season for those new things. So once again, just some crushed rosemary, a little bit of garlic powder, and some pepper. I did not add any more salt just because I am going to be adding a brown gravy packet here, and that does have a good bit of salt in it by itself, so I didn't really want to overdo it. Now, I am a big fan of not making more dishes than I need to. I do have a dishwasher at this point, but for most of my life I grew up without one, so I am very conscious of how many dishes I am using. So to the skillet, I just added 1.5 cups of water, added that brown gravy packet, and I just mixed it together in here. It turned out fine, wasn't lumpy, wasn't powdery, nothing like that. So let it go ahead and cook down, simmer, and thicken up. Here I'm going to go ahead and take it off of the heat and add this mixture to my baking dish. Then I'm going to go ahead and start putting the leftover mashed potatoes from the meatloaf recipe on top. Now this next step might seem really extra, but I'm going to go ahead and take a fork and flatten out the mashed potatoes on top, also trying to make some nice little ridges and grooves on top so that when we put this in the oven to bake and broil, it will get crispy and delicious. Then I just sprinkle some paprika on top, mostly to make it look pretty because I don't super taste paprika unless it's in large quantities. Here we go, right out of the oven. This is a favorite. It's a tried and true recipe. I actually don't even really follow one at this point, so if you guys are interested in having a recipe, I will try to find one that's very similar and you can use measurements from there. This is a really quick and easy weeknight dinner. Now, this isn't a dinner recipe, obviously, but I do have 2 children who are fairly picky eaters. One of them does have sensory issues, and the other one just kind of mimics. So I do like to try to give them some options that are not only healthy but filling, and this is one of them that I came up with this week. And by came up with, I mean I had some really ripe bananas on my counter and I decided to make some banana blueberry oatmeal muffins. I'll have the recipe linked down below so that you can have the exact measurements. But to start out with, I just took 3 very ripe bananas, mashed them in the bowl, added 1 egg, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, and stirred that to combine. Next, you're going to add a 1/3 cup of melted butter. Go ahead and stir that to combine, and then you're going to start adding in your dry ingredients. I never use a separate bowl. I always mix everything into the same bowl, and I've never had any issues. So here we're going to add some brown sugar, flour, baking soda, and baking powder. And the recipe calls for quick oats, but I did not have quick oats, so I just went ahead and used old-fashioned oats, and seems to work out just fine. I also added cinnamon and salt, which the recipe calls for, but I did add a little bit more cinnamon than it calls for just because we really like cinnamon. This recipe stressed multiple times to not overwork the dough, so I was really cautious to pay attention and definitely not do that. Next, you're going to add in 1 cup of blueberries. A nice little trick is to coat your blueberries in some flour, and that'll help them distribute evenly in your batter. The original recipe was made for like full-sized muffins, but my kids really like anything mini-sized, so I just adapted the recipe to mini muffins, which is really simple. Basically, you follow your recipe as normal, you just reduce the time down from whatever it is to 10 to 12 minutes. You have some yummy, healthy muffins that your kids can eat whenever you make dinner and they don't want to eat it. Now, like I said, I do have 2 very picky eaters, so this is just a reality for me. I don't really hold it against them or myself. They just don't like certain foods, and that's okay. So here I'm just doing the old-fashioned toothpick test to see that they're done, sprinkling a tiny little bit of sugar on top, and that wraps up these muffins. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I really hope you enjoyed the recipes I shared. If you liked this video, please like it and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in my next one. Bye!